June 23, 1944. Mid-Atlantic Ocean. The world above the waves was absolute black. Not the kind of darkness that comes with nightfall, but the kind that swallows sound. A living, breathing void. Clouds hung low over the sea, heavy with the smell of iron and salt. There was no moon, no stars, just a blanket of nothing stretching from horizon to horizon. Somewhere beneath that endless black water, a steel creature moved silently through the deep. The Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-52. Inside her narrow hull, the air was thick and oily, tasting of sweat and machinery. Metal pipes hissed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the ship. The faint buzz of the diesel engines vibrated through the steel floor plates, a low mechanical hum that never stopped. Men spoke in murmurs, their words disappearing into the noise. Everything was close. The walls, the heat, the smell of unwashed uniforms and lubricant. A submarine was not a vessel. It was a coffin that moved. Commander Uno Kameo stood in the cramped control room, his gloved hands resting on the periscope handles. He was 40 years old, but months at sea had carved his face into something older, eyes sunken, skin pale from recycled air. His officers waited quietly for his command. The clock on the bulkhead ticked toward midnight. They were approaching the rendezvous point, codenamed Position 1, somewhere 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. There, under cover of night, they were to meet their German ally, U-530 of the Kriegsmarine. For the past 10 days, Kameo's crew had lived inside this mechanical tomb, cutting through cold Atlantic waters with no news from home. They carried the weight of the empire in their hold. 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, tungsten, molybdenum, and rubber. In return, they would receive radar and code technology, optical glass, and the kind of secrets only Germany still possessed in this late hour of war. It was a mission born of desperation. Japan's sea routes were collapsing, her cities burning, her factories starving. The I-52 was not a weapon. She was a lifeline. At 23:40, the order came to surface. Compressed air hissed through the ballast tanks. The hull creaked as the pressure equalized. Then, with a long metallic sigh, I-52 broke through the black water, her conning tower slicing the waves like a blade. The sea around her shimmered faintly under cloud-filtered starlight. For the first time in days, the men tasted fresh air, heavy with salt and freedom. "Deck secured," the watch officer called. His voice echoed through the narrow corridor. Kameo climbed the ladder to the conning tower. The Atlantic wind hit his face, cold, sharp, alive. He lifted his binoculars, scanning the horizon. Nothing but waves. Then, through the mist, a faint light blinked twice. Long, short. The signal of the German U-530. Across the water, another submarine rose like a ghost. Its hull glistened, black and wet, as it cut through the swells. The 2 steel beasts floated side by side in the middle of nowhere. Allies of necessity, bound by a dying alliance. Men on both vessels worked in silence. Orders passed in low voices, half in German, half in broken Japanese. The language barrier mattered little. War had its own grammar. They used small rubber boats to ferry the cargo, metal containers packed with radar components, Enigma coding equipment, and vacuum tubes. Each crate was sealed against the sea, painted with swastikas and Japanese kanji alike. The transfer took hours. The only light came from shaded lanterns, their glow trembling across the wet decks. From a distance, it would have looked like a secret ritual. 2 machines exchanging souls in the dark. Kameo stood by the rail, watching his men labor in silence. The sea slapped against the hull, rhythmic and cold. He felt the tension in his chest ease for the first time in weeks. The mission was working. Against odds, They had found each other in an ocean large enough to swallow nations. The success filled him with a strange, fragile pride. Perhaps, he thought, the gods had not abandoned Japan after all. Yet somewhere in that darkness, another presence was listening. The I-52's sound operator, a young ensign named Taro Mitsuda, sat alone in the sonar shack, headphones pressed tight against his ears. His world was made of sound. The constant hum of the engines, the crackle of static, and the occasional deep thrum of ocean life. Tonight, though, he caught something new. A faint ping, rhythmic, distant. It came and went, like the slow heartbeat of a giant. He frowned, adjusting the gain. "Captain," he whispered, "there is a sound. Mechanical, perhaps a whale." Kameo leaned over the intercom, his tone calm but curious. "A whale, you say?" Mitsuda hesitated. "Yes, sir. But it's too regular, too perfect." Kameo smiled faintly. "The ocean is full of strange music, ensign. Focus on your duty." But the sound persisted, faint, repeating at intervals. It wasn't whale song. It wasn't natural. It was something the sea had never made before. By 2:10, the transfer was complete. The Germans signaled their farewell. Through the periscope, Kameo watched U-530 vanish into the black horizon. Only the faint churn of her wake remained. He turned to his first officer, nodding. "Set course for Lorient, 20 knots. We sail for France below decks." The men resumed their routines, closing valves, checking ballast, logging temperatures. The diesel engines rumbled to life, filling the hull with a comforting vibration. Someone brewed coffee. Someone else sang softly under his breath. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. Kameo returned to his small cabin, sat at his desk, and opened his journal. A leather-bound notebook already stained with salt. He wrote slowly, the pencil trembling with the motion of the sea. June 23rd, 1944. The rendezvous was successful. The Germans were cold but efficient. Their technology is remarkable, compact, logical, ruthless in design. I sense the tide of war is turning, but not in our favor. The enemy we face is not of flesh, but of silence. A soundless enemy. He paused, looking at the words. Then he closed the book, slid it into the drawer, and listened to the hum of the engines. Steady, familiar, alive. But outside, the ocean had changed. Somewhere far above, invisible in the black sky, a formation of aircraft circled. One of them, an American Avenger torpedo bomber, released a small object into the water. It splashed once, then floated upright, a slender cylinder glowing faintly in the dark. It began to listen. The sonobuoy heard the diesel engines, the propeller cavitation, the human heartbeats inside the steel shell below. It translated the sea's language into radio pulses, sending them skyward. In the cockpit miles above, headphones crackled. A voice said quietly, "We have contact." Below, in the steel corridors of Guy 52, no one heard a thing. The submarine pressed on, unaware that the ocean itself was now an accomplice to its destruction. Camille walked the passageway one last time, checking gauges, patting shoulders, offering the quiet encouragement of a captain who believed he would see land again. He paused beside the radio room, where an operator sat frowning at his console. "Something strange, sir," the operator said. A faint echo on the frequency, like tapping. "Perhaps German communication?" Cameo suggested. "Perhaps," the man replied, though his eyes said otherwise. At 2:40, the submarine dove again, slipping beneath the surface into darkness deeper than any night sky. The men sealed the hatches. The engines shifted to electric power. Silence reclaimed the ship. Only the sonar ping, that strange, artificial heartbeat, remained faintly in the distance. Within 3 hours, 94 men would vanish into a silence that could still be heard. The Atlantic night was endless, a slow-moving black that swallowed the horizon whole. Far above the waves, the USS Buoy hunter-killer group cut through the dark like a ghost fleet. Each ship carried its own slice of light. A dim red bulb on a bridge, a flicker of a cigarette behind a gun mount, the glowing dials of a radar console. But beyond that, there was only ocean, and the quiet understanding that somewhere down there, in the black beneath the black, an enemy might be listening too. On the flight deck of the escort carrier Buoy, a Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bomber sat poised at the edge of the runway. Its propeller spun lazily, chopping through fog and salt air. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor checked his gauges one last time. Fuel, pressure, altitude calibration, before flicking the radio switch. "Buoy Control, this is Avenger 3-1, he said, voice calm but clipped. "Engines green, radar operational, commencing night patrol." The answer came through static. "Copy that, 3-1. Maintain altitude 4,000. Good huntin'." Taylor gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Avenger roared down the deck, its wheels bouncing once before the whole machine lifted into the void. The world below turned into ink. Only the faint glimmer of the ocean remained, a living, shifting mirror that reflected nothing back. Inside the cockpit, the red glow of instruments painted Taylor's face in soft, ghostly light. He took a sip from his tin thermos, coffee gone lukewarm, and scanned the radar scope mounted beside his knee. It was the same ritual every night. Fly, scan, circle, listen. The sea was big enough to hide 1,000 submarines, and small enough to die in without anyone ever knowing. Behind him, his radio man, Ensign Gordon, adjusted the sonar relay, listening to the low hum of the sea as it came through their sensors. The air smelled of fuel, sweat, and machine oil, the perfume of every long patrol. Taylor didn't mind it. He trusted the hum of engines more than the sound of his own thoughts. At 23:59, a faint blip appeared on the radar screen. Small, almost insignificant. Taylor leaned forward, squinting. "You see that?" Gordon tapped the screen. "Could be clutter, sir. Or debris. Or it could be a submarine," Taylor murmured. He circled the mark once, twice. It moved, barely, like something alive but cautious. He keyed his mic. "Control, this is Avenger 3-1. We have possible contact." Coordinates following static crackled. Then the calm voice of the flight commander came back. "Roger that, 3-1. You are weapons free. Confirm with sonobuoys." Taylor nodded, setting his jaw. He eased the aircraft lower. The sea rose toward him, a rippling expanse of black glass. "Ready the purple buoy," he said. Gordon reached behind him, pulling a metal cylinder from its rack, the new type, still experimental. A small American flag was stamped on the casing, next to the words AN/CRT-1 sonobuoy, classified. "Purple buoy armed," Gordon said. "Drop on my mark." Taylor descended to 200 feet. The ocean wind slammed against the fuselage, making the plane shudder. He counted down. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The buoy fell away, spinning end over end until it vanished into the sea with a faint splash. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum filled Gordon's headphones. He smiled. "It's live." Taylor steadied the plane, circling wide. "All right, let's see if the ocean wants to talk." The sonobuoy bobbed on the water like a lonely lighthouse, its antenna barely breaking the surface. Beneath it, a delicate web of sensors unfolded, reaching into the deep. The device began to listen. The sea was never truly silent. There was always movement, always vibration. But this sound was different. It came in patterns, a pulse, a metallic rhythm that didn't belong to nature. The buoy listened, Gordon would later write in his mission log. The sea spoke. The machine understood. He adjusted the filters, isolating the frequency. Through the hum came faint mechanical beats. A propeller's signature, clean and constant. Contact confirmed, he whispered. Bearing 247. Taylor's fingers tightened around the control stick. She's out there. He throttled up slightly, keeping his altitude low. Every sense was tuned to the invisible, to the sound that shouldn't exist. Gordon fed the data into the primitive onboard computer. The display needle flickered, showing range, 1,800 yards and closing. Depth estimate? Taylor asked. 200 feet, Gordon replied. Heading east-northeast. Surface vessel? No, submerged. She's running silent. Taylor frowned. Not silent enough. He reached over to arm the weapon bay. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo, codenamed Fido, waited beneath the fuselage, a weapon unlike anything the enemy had yet imagined. It didn't rely on sight or radar or luck. It listened. Once released, it would glide through the sea, chasing the heartbeat of its prey until the sound stopped forever. Ready the Fido, Taylor said quietly. Armed, Gordon confirmed. The third crewman, Chief Petty Officer Macklin, leaned forward from his gunner's seat. You sure we got her, Skipper? Taylor didn't answer immediately. He stared out through the canopy at the infinite black of the sea below. We'll know soon enough. He made a final pass over the coordinates. The sonobuoy's signal grew stronger. Target dead ahead, Gordon said. Bearing steady. Taylor exhaled slowly, thumb hovering over the release switch. God forgive us, he murmured. He pressed the button. The Mark 24 dropped into the Atlantic with a soft splash, vanishing in an instant. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then, deep below, the torpedo came alive. Its propeller spinning, its hydrophone ears opening. It began to search, listening for the pulse of the I-52's engines. Inside the Japanese submarine, the crew felt a vibration. Faint, unfamiliar. Mitsuda, the sonar operator, adjusted his headphones. Captain, I hear something. It's moving fast. Kameo turned sharply. Bearing? Unknown, sir. It's small, but it's tracking us. Evasive maneuver. Dive to 300 feet. Silent running. The helmsman spun the wheel. Valves hissed. The submarine tilted. But the Fido was already locked on, its primitive brain feeding on the noise of the I-52's screws. In the blackness of the deep, the two machines began their dance, one fleeing, one listening. Above, in the Avenger, Gordon kept his headphones pressed tight. He could hear it, the strange symphony of pursuit. Still tracking, he said softly. Speed increasing. Now it's close. Then came the sound, a deep, muffled thud. Then another. The radio crackled with a surge of static. Gordon looked up. Impact. Taylor didn't speak. He banked the plane, circling back toward the spot. Through the flare of burning magnesium, he saw a faint bloom of oil spreading across the surface, shimmering in the moonlight like black glass. The ocean swallowed the evidence almost immediately. In the cockpit, no one celebrated. No one cheered. They just stared at the spot where the sea still churned. Taylor took a slow breath, the kind you take when something final has just happened. Mark the position, he said quietly. Gordon wrote it down. 15 degrees, 16 minutes north. 39 degrees, 55 minutes west. Then silence. The Avenger climbed back into the night, engines fading into the clouds. Below them, 94 men drifted into the dark. Their gold, their cargo, their final breaths trapped inside a steel tomb. The sonobuoy continued to float, transmitting faint echoes into the sky until its battery died. When Taylor returned to the Buoy, he logged his report without embellishment. Greater than submarine sunk. Acoustic contact verified. Debris and oil sighted. Target presumed destroyed. He handed the clipboard to his superior and walked out onto the deck. The dawn was beginning to break, a thin orange line on the horizon. He lit a cigarette, the flame trembling in the wind. Somewhere out there, beneath miles of salt and silence, another war had just ended. Not with a battle, not with a scream, just a sound that shouldn't exist. A sound only the machines could hear. In Tokyo, the morning of July 5th, 1944 began like any other in a nation at war. Clipped footsteps in corridors, typewriters clacking in distant offices, and the faint rumble of air raid drills echoing through the city. The Imperial Navy's communications center sat inside a concrete fortress on the edge of the harbor. Inside, men in white uniforms moved quietly between radio consoles, copying Morse transmissions that crackled through static. But one channel remained silent. The call sign JI-9I, belonging to the submarine I-52, had not been heard in 10 days. Lieutenant Commander Hideo Tanaka, head of submarine communications, adjusted his headphones and tried the signal again. Only white noise answered. Somewhere deep in that static, he thought he heard faint tapping, like rain on a tin roof. But it was nothing he could decode. He logged another failed contact attempt and underlined the entry. No response. By noon, the silence had grown heavy enough to draw attention. A runner carried the report up to the submarine division's headquarters, where a group of senior officers gathered around a long table littered with charts and cigarette ash. Admiral Shigeyoshi Miwa, head of the 6th Fleet, read the report without expression. Then he looked up and said quietly, "Perhaps the sea took her." No one spoke. Losing a submarine was not unusual in 1944. By then, American hunter-killer groups prowled the Atlantic and Pacific alike, sinking Japanese vessels faster than Tokyo could count them. But I-52 was different. She was not just a weapon. She was a message of hope. Her success would have proven that Japan could still reach her German allies. Her loss meant that even the deep ocean, once Japan's refuge, had turned hostile. "Try again," Miwa said finally. "Perhaps the radio is damaged." And so, for the next week, they tried. Every midnight, operators sent the same call signal into the void, hoping for the faint click of a response. None came. The room grew quieter each night, the smell of tobacco thicker, the silence deeper. By the 20th day, the Navy declared I-52 missing in action. The announcement was short, bureaucratic, almost indifferent. But in the corridors of the Naval Staff Office, whispers spread quickly. "How can a single aircraft sink a submarine so far from land?" one officer asked. "Impossible," another muttered. "They must have used some new weapon." The first rumor came from a merchant ship captain who had overheard a coded American transmission mentioning acoustic ordnance. The phrase made no sense to most, but it began to circulate like poison. A few weeks later, fragments of intelligence intercepted from Berlin confirmed what many feared. Germany reported the loss of contact with U-530's Japanese counterpart after a rendezvous in the mid-Atlantic. The Germans hinted that the Americans were now using listening torpedoes. Listening torpedoes. The idea sounded absurd, almost supernatural. A weapon that could hear? Inside Japan's Submarine Design Bureau in Kure, engineers gathered around chalkboards, sketching desperate theories. Lieutenant Commander Fujimoto, a radar specialist, slammed his fist against the table. "If it's true," he said, "then our oceans are no longer ours." Japan's engineers prided themselves on craftsmanship. Their submarines were enormous, some capable of carrying seaplanes, others designed to circle the globe. They believed in scale, precision, and courage. But the Americans were fighting a different war, one of electronics, computation, and quiet efficiency. By late summer, fragments of recovered intelligence began to reach the technical division. Reports spoke of sonobuoys, small floating sensors dropped from aircraft to detect submarines by sound. Others mentioned acoustic torpedoes guided by underwater microphones and hunter-killer task groups that combined aircraft, radar, and sonar-equipped destroyers into coordinated wolf packs. Each new report was like a needle puncturing the myth of Japanese invulnerability. For years, Japanese submarine doctrine had relied on stealth and endurance. Dive deep, and the enemy will lose you, their manual said. But now the ocean itself had turned against them. Diving deep no longer meant safety. It meant entering an invisible trap. In one naval training base near Yokosuka, a young ensign named Nakahara sat in a classroom, watching as his instructor chalked a circle on the board. "This," the man said, tapping the circle, "is the new enemy. Sound." He explained how the Americans had learned to see with their ears. Radar to find the submarine's shadow on the surface, sonobuoys to listen below, and acoustic torpedoes to finish the hunt. The room was silent. The students' faces were pale. One of them raised his hand. "Sir, how do we defend against something we can't hear?" The instructor hesitated. "We build quieter engines. We move slower. We pray it was not the answer they wanted." In the months that followed, stories spread like ghosts among the fleet. Submariners told tales of strange pings echoing through the water. Sounds too perfect, too regular. Crews began to imagine invisible watchers lurking beyond every current. When a sonar operator reported hearing what he thought was whale song, officers would glance nervously at each other. Whales, after all, didn't sink submarines. A petty officer named Ishimura, serving aboard I-183, began to keep a notebook of these sounds. Rhythmic pulses, metallic hums, high-pitched wails. "The Americans," he wrote, "have trained the sea itself to speak for them." Every dive felt tighter now. The air grew heavier, the walls closer. Men slept beside torpedoes, their dreams full of sonar pings that would not stop. One night, off the coast of Formosa, I-183's mechanic, sweating in the stifling heat, tightened a bolt and muttered a tune under his breath. A simple song about home. His humming carried down the narrow corridor, mixing with the hum of the engines. The sonar operator flinched and hissed, "Quiet! The Americans can hear you?" It became a joke for a while. The Americans can hear you. But the laughter never lasted. Soon it was a curse whispered before diving. "Let the sea forget our names." Back in Tokyo, reports kept arriving. One submarine overdue, another sunk, another simply vanished. The Navy's confidence began to crumble. Admiral Miwa stopped reading casualty lists aloud during meetings. Officers avoided eye contact when discussing patrol assignments. Even the Emperor's staff began to sense the dread that now haunted Japan's once proud underwater fleet. For the first time, Japan's sailors feared not what they could see, but what they could not. A secret memo circulated among naval engineers described the situation in clinical terms. Greater than enemy employs distributed acoustic detection devices. Effective range, several miles. Probability of submarine escape after detection, less than 10%. But behind those statistics were faces, young, tired, frightened, who knew what the numbers meant. In a dim barracks room, a lookout named Sato sat cleaning his periscope lenses, though he knew he might never see through them again. "The Americans fight with ghosts," he whispered to his bunkmate. "They send sound into the water, and death follows the echo." That night, when I-363 prepared to dive for another supply run, Sato refused to sleep. He sat by the bulkhead, listening to the hum of the engines and the creak of the hull, waiting for that other sound. The ping. The one that always came before the end. It didn't come that night. But for Sato and thousands like him, the silence itself had become the enemy. By the end of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy knew the truth. The war beneath the sea was over. They had not been defeated by superior ships or braver men or sharper eyes, but by something invisible: sound. The one element they could not command, the one weapon they could not see coming. And so, quietly, in the records of Japan's Navy Ministry, a new line began to appear beside lost vessels, greater than presumed sunk, cause unknown, possibly acoustic. The words were as cold and final as the ocean itself. By the summer of 1945, the Pacific had become an American lake. The Japanese Empire, once stretching across thousands of miles, was shrinking into itself. Its harbors were silent, its convoys shattered, and its sailors no longer spoke of victory. They spoke of endurance, of surviving one more week, one more voyage, one more dawn. Yet deep in the Navy's war rooms, a few men still clung to an illusion. They believed the Sea of Japan was their final sanctuary, a body of water sealed off from American attack by narrow straits and dense minefields. No submarine, they said, could ever enter and return alive. The Americans were about to prove them wrong. The operation was codenamed Barney, a mission so bold that even its planners called it suicidal. 9 American submarines would attempt to slip through the Tsushima Strait, one of the most heavily mined and guarded passages in the world. Their goal was simple: penetrate the so-called safe waters of Japan and destroy the last remnants of her shipping fleet. But this time, the submarines carried something new: a secret weapon of sound. It was called FM Sonar, though the men who used it preferred another name: Hell's Bells. Unlike the crude pings of earlier systems, Hell's Bells emitted a smooth, musical tone, a constant hum that returned clear, precise echoes of everything around it. To the men listening through their headphones, it was like hearing underwater ghosts whisper back. June 4th, 1945. The submarine USS Sea Dog, under Commander Earl Heidman, drifted just below the waves near Okinawa. Inside the control room, the only light came from the sonar display. A green circle pulsing softly in the dark. The air was thick with diesel fumes and human breath. A single bead of sweat rolled down the sonar operator's neck as he adjusted the dial. "Hell's Bells active," he said. "Range clear, 0 contacts." Heidman leaned over his shoulder. "Begin approach." Outside, the water glowed faintly from plankton disturbed by the sub's slow advance. Ahead lay a minefield, an invisible labyrinth of death. Each mine was tethered to the seabed by a thin cable, waiting to tear open anything that brushed against it. In the old days, they would have guessed their way through. Now Hell's Bells sang. The tone pulsed softly, echoing through the sea and returning as music only the machine could understand. On the display, the mines appeared as delicate arcs of light, each one mapped and measured. The helmsman adjusted course by inches, threading through them as though following a trail of stars. "Depth steady at 70 feet, the navigator whispered. "Speed, 2 knots. The submarine crept forward, a steel shadow moving through a field of invisible knives. Every man aboard knew that one mistake would end it instantly. Yet they trusted the tone. The faint hum became their lifeline, their heartbeat, their prayer. After hours of silent maneuvering, they broke through into the open waters of the Sea of Japan. Heidman exhaled for the first time in minutes. "We're in," he said softly. "God help them." By dawn, 2 more submarines, USS Creval and USS Spadefish, had followed successfully. Operation Barney had succeeded. The Japanese had no idea. To them, the Sea of Japan remained sacred, untouchable. Merchant captains smoked cigarettes on deck as their ships steamed toward ports in Korea and Hokkaido. Fishermen chatted idly on small boats, unaware that American submarines now lurked beneath them, engines humming softly like predators waiting to strike. The first attack came on June 9th. Sea Dog picked up a convoy, 6 freighters escorted by a single destroyer. Heidman watched through the periscope as the ships glided across the surface, dark shapes against a gray dawn. "Set up a spread," he ordered. Torpedo tubes flooded, valves hissed. "Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3. The explosions tore through the calm morning like thunder. Columns of water and flame shot into the sky. One freighter snapped in half, another erupted into a burning inferno. Heidman's men watched through the periscope as sailors jumped into the sea, their silhouettes flickering in the glow of burning oil. There was no satisfaction in it, only awe. "Reload," Heidman said quietly. "We're not done." In Tokyo, the first reports arrived that afternoon. 2 merchant ships lost. Possible mines. Admirals dismissed it. The Sea of Japan was too well defended. It must have been an accident. But the sinkings continued. Day after day, American submarines struck convoys that were supposed to be safe. Creval sank a tanker off Kyoto. Spadefish destroyed 3 freighters near Hokkaido. Sea Poacher crippled a troopship so close to shore that survivors swam into their own harbors. The Japanese Navy refused to believe what was happening. "Our waters are secure," an officer insisted during a staff briefing. "No enemy could have crossed the minefields." Another officer whispered, "Then perhaps the sea itself has turned against us." By late June, disbelief gave way to panic. Merchant captains began refusing orders to sail. Families crowded the docks, crying as their husbands boarded ships that might never return. Even the fishing fleet stayed close to shore, terrified of unseen shadows beneath them. The illusion of safety, the last comfort Japan had left, was gone. Heidman's men called it the Silent Harvest. They prowled the Sea of Japan for 2 weeks, surfacing only to send brief radio messages. 5 ships sunk, returning undetected. When Operation Barney ended, the 9 submarines had destroyed nearly half of Japan's remaining merchant tonnage in waters once considered untouchable. Not a single American submarine was lost. For Japan's Navy, the realization was shattering. If even the Sea of Japan, the heart of the empire, could be penetrated, then nothing remained. Geography had failed. Strategy had failed. All that was left was the echo of defeat. In the weeks that followed, the surviving captains gathered in dim rooms, reading reports they no longer understood. The diagrams showed torpedo tracks and sonar sweeps, but the meaning went deeper than tactics. Technology had changed the very rules of the ocean. One young officer, staring at the glowing lines on a captured American sonar chart, whispered, "We never fought them. We fought their machines outside." The summer cicadas screamed over the rooftops of a dying empire. By July, Japan's cities were burning, her navy scattered, her seas no longer hers. Operation Barney had not just sunk ships, it had sunk faith. The ocean that once defended Japan now whispered with American sonar. And in that whisper, the empire heard its own ending. By the summer of 1945, the war's outcome was no longer in question, only its mechanics. The Pacific had become a living map of cause and consequence, and in that vast equation, technology was no longer a mere instrument of men. It had become destiny itself. Across the ocean, in the restless cities of America, factories no longer slept. The air in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and San Diego carried the thick scent of molten metal, machine oil, and human determination. Sparks rained in orange showers as welders joined hull plates. Cranes swung like giant arms above the shipyards, and every hammer strike echoed as a heartbeat in a national machine that never stopped moving. In the Midwest, women in denim overalls wound copper coils for sonar transducers, their fingers stained with grease and varnish, while in California, teenagers hauled blueprints up and down endless stairs, and in Chicago, engineers refined filters able to tell whale song from the rhythmic beat of submarine propellers. The war was no longer about muscle or bravery. It had become a contest of frequencies, voltages, and calculations. Factories turned into cathedrals, and those who labored within them formed a silent congregation worshiping efficiency. In a laboratory at Harvard, physicist Frederick Hunt leaned over a small tank of water where ripples glimmered beneath fluorescent light. Two transducers pulsed in precise alternation, sending waves that bounced and returned as patterns on an oscilloscope. Hunt smiled at the shape on the screen. "The ocean speaks in echoes," he murmured to his assistant. "We're just learning its grammar." It was a poetic truth. America had turned sound itself into an ally. Half a world away, Japan's engineers were discovering a different kind of silence. In Kure Naval Arsenal, the birthplace of the mighty I-class submarines, the workshop stood half empty. Bombs had ripped holes through the roofs, and broken girders framed the gray sky. Men who had once built undersea giants now scavenged for steel scraps to patch old hulls. Lanterns replaced electric light, and the hum of ambition had faded into the scratch of tools and the shuffle of worn boots. Commander Aritomo Ariizumi, designer of the legendary I-400 class, walked among the ruins of his workshop, past engines that would never run and blueprints blackened by soot. His creation had been meant to change the war, a submarine so vast it could carry airplanes and strike across oceans. But by the time his masterpieces were ready, the ocean itself had turned traitor. Ariizumi watched as technicians tried to revive a salvaged radar unit, its needles trembling weakly before dying again. The faint static reminded him of rain on a distant roof. "Even the air betrays us," he whispered. He had read every report. The sinking of I-52, the losses in the Sea of Japan, Operation Barney, the American acoustic torpedoes. He understood what few of his admirals would admit, that Japan's war had been fought in the wrong century. The Americans had industrialized perception itself. Radar to see through clouds, sonar to see through water, computation to turn chaos into prediction. Machines were talking to machines, and men simply followed their rhythm. In contrast, Japan still built by hand, guided by pride and tradition. Their submarines were crafted like swords, beautiful, intricate, but too few and too slow. The Americans produced theirs like bullets, identical and endless. In Washington, statistics spoke with merciless clarity. The United States had built 314 submarines during the war, Japan barely 71. American destroyer escorts outnumbered Japanese destroyers 5-1, and aircraft production favored the Allies by a factor of 9. When Admiral Charles Lockwood glanced at those numbers, he told an aide quietly, "We don't fight the Japanese Navy anymore. We fight their limitations." It was the purest truth of the technological war. Victory belonged not to who shot straighter, but to who could hear farther, think faster, and build longer. When captured Japanese submariners later boarded American vessels after the surrender, disbelief filled their faces. The control rooms were bright and orderly. Dials glowed softly, gauges held steady, and every switch responded with effortless precision. One petty officer named Yamashita, once a sonar operator aboard I-363, ran his fingers across the smooth panel of an American sonar console and whispered, "Ours rattled like bones. This one hums like music." The American beside him smiled and said, "You're hearing your replacement." For Ariizumi, that realization was unbearable. He had devoted his life to mastering darkness, designing vessels meant to vanish into the deep, yet the deep itself had betrayed him. Mapped, dissected, conquered by sound. The ocean was no longer mystery but data. On August 15, 1945, the day Emperor Hirohito announced surrender, Ariizumi sat alone inside one of his own I-400 submarines moored in Maizuru Bay. Outside, the water was mirror calm. Inside, he opened his logbook and wrote a single line: "The ocean has chosen its master." Then, following the code of the defeated samurai, he ended his life quietly, as if to concede that machines had achieved what men could not. News of his death spread through the shattered fleet with barely a ripple. The war, after all, had not ended with a shout, but with a hum, the steady, mechanical hum of devices that listened better than any human ear. In America, the same engineers who had built those weapons were already turning them toward peace. The sonar arrays that had hunted submarines would soon guide passenger ships through fog. The vacuum tubes of wartime radar would become the heart of household televisions. The computers that calculated torpedo trajectories would one day process weather forecasts and music. Technology had consumed the old gods of war and replaced them with logic and precision. The same pulses of sound that had doomed I-52 would later help oceanographers map the seafloor, and the same sonar echoes that once carried death would become the foundation for discovery. The ocean had changed ownership, not through heroism, not through empire, but through innovation, patience, and the quiet inevitability of progress. Machines had learned to hear, and by doing so, they had silenced history's last illusions of invincibility. In a cold archive room in Washington, years after the war had ended, two small wire spools sat inside a wooden box labeled simply Gordon Wire Number 1 and Number 2. The tape was fragile, brown, and faintly metallic, its coils wound like memory itself. When played through an old Navy recorder, the sound it carried was not music nor speech, but something far stranger. The dying breath of a machine. A faint hum, a series of low thuds, then a rising rush of bubbles and silence. It was the sound of the I-52 dying, recorded that night in June 1944 by American aircraft that had dropped their floating ears into the sea. The ocean, for a few seconds, had spoken, and humanity had captured its voice. Historians who listened to those spools often described the experience as unsettling. The noise wasn't loud, yet it filled the room with a pressure that felt alive, as if the water itself had memory, as if the sea still remembered what it had swallowed. To hear it was to confront a truth no textbook could teach. Wars end, but their echoes never fade. Every machine that sinks, every man who vanishes, leaves behind vibrations that never truly stop moving. They travel through salt, through time, through technology, until someone, somewhere, learns to hear them again. In post-war Japan, that echo transformed into something else. Engineers who had survived the naval collapse began to rebuild, driven by a quiet oath: never again fall behind in technology. Many of them had once worked on submarines and torpedoes. Now they turned their minds toward peace. The same discipline that had built weapons of silence was redirected toward precision instruments, electronics, and engines. They studied the devices that had defeated them: radar, sonar, vacuum tubes, not with resentment, but with fascination. They wanted to understand how sound, current, and code had rewritten destiny. In the 1950s, Japanese engineers studying under American advisors at research centers in Tokyo and Osaka would replay those wartime recordings during training lectures. "Listen carefully," one instructor would say. "That hum you hear is the sound of ignorance, our own." They took it as scripture. Out of that humility rose a new generation of innovators. Sony, born from the ashes of wartime research, began building radios so compact and reliable that they could pick up the faintest broadcast across the ocean. Toyota refined the art of efficiency until their engines ran with the same harmony as a submarine's pulse. Honda, once a small part supplier, learned to balance combustion and silence like sonar itself. Even Japan's shipyards, rebuilt with American steel and German discipline, became laboratories for precision. Each decade, the echo of I-52 seemed to change form, from defeat to lesson to rhythm. The engineers who listened no longer heard death. They heard opportunity. The pulse of that submarine's final dive, a pattern of vibrations trapped on wire, became, in a sense, the tempo of Japan's rebirth. The nation that once drowned in silence now built machines that spoke fluently in frequencies. Radios, cameras, engines, and computers all carried the same philosophy: clarity through precision, mastery through sound. For America, too, the memory of I-52 became more than a story of victory. It was a monument to the moment when the ocean itself became knowable, when technology crossed from weaponry into awareness. The sonobuoy, once a disposable wartime sensor, evolved into tools for oceanographers mapping the deep. The sonar transducer, born from fear, became the ear through which humankind heard the heartbeat of whales and the echo of undersea mountains. The same scientific principles that had ended a submarine now guided ships through storms and aircraft through clouds. The instruments of death had become the language of understanding. Yet there was still something haunting about the original recordings. In 1995, a team of oceanographers led by American researcher Paul Tidwell located the wreck of I-52 almost 3 miles below the surface. The cameras they lowered showed a landscape of eternal darkness. The submarine resting on its side, encrusted in manganese and coral, her gold cargo still sealed within. Fish drifted through open hatches. No bones remained, only the outline of metal, the skeleton of an idea. The sea had preserved its secret well. When the footage reached Japan, elderly engineers wept silently in television studios. For them, it was not just a wreck. It was the end of arrogance, the beginning of humility. They understood something the younger generation could not. The F-52 had not simply been sunk by superior weapons. It had been undone by an unseen transformation. The birth of an era where sound replaced sight and machines replaced instinct. The Americans had not merely listened better. They had taught their machines to understand what they heard. That understanding had rewritten the balance of power, and the echo of that realization had guided Japan's reconstruction for half a century. In classrooms, Japanese students studying engineering were sometimes shown diagrams of early sonar systems, the same kind that had hunted the I-52. Their professors would tell them, "This is what defeated us." Learn from it, those students would go on to design computers, Walkmans, and hybrid cars that reshaped the modern world. The humiliation of 1944 had become the foundation of a new kind of strength. Quiet, disciplined, unrelenting. Japan's national identity shifted from the sword to the circuit, from secrecy to sound. The echo had turned into rhythm, the rhythm of reinvention. Meanwhile, in museums and naval academies across the United States, the name I-52 became a case study in technological evolution. Cadets listened to the recording of that night. The faint ping, the growl of the Mark 24 torpedo, the crushing silence that followed, and learned the same lesson their fathers had once taught in factories and hangars: that innovation wins wars and understanding keeps peace. The moral was simple: those who hear first survive. Now, decades later, as digital sonar maps every contour of the ocean floor and satellites chart its currents from orbit, the story of I-52 feels almost mythic. The moment humanity proved that even the deep had no secrets left. Yet when those recordings are played, when that faint metallic groan fills a dark room, something ancient stirs beneath the science. It is not triumph. It is not pity. It is remembrance. The ocean does not judge who listens. It only remembers who didn't. In the end, the sound of I-52's death was more than the end of a submarine. It was the beginning of a truth that still defines the modern world: that technology is both weapon and mirror. It reflects who we are, what we fear, and what we aspire to become. For Japan, that reflection became rebirth. For America, it became responsibility. For the ocean, it became memory. And so the story closes where it began, in silence. The same Atlantic that once swallowed I-52 now hums with data cables and sonar pulses. carrying the world's conversations across its floor. The gold she carried may still rest there, but her real treasure was something else entirely. A sound, a warning, a lesson. In the darkness of the Atlantic, the ocean had spoken. Japan heard it too late. But the echo became a blueprint, the sound of defeat transformed into the rhythm of rebirth. The ocean belongs not to those who sail it, but to those who can hear it first.